Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the show based on the Thrive Bible reading guides. This is an ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive's author, Dr. Matthew Jacoby, and your host, DJ Payne.
G'day and welcome to episode 134 of your favourite Bible study podcast, Thrive Deeper. It's your fellow lover of all things Bible, DJ Payne here, and on this fortnight's episode, Matthew Jacoby and I sit down together and we attempt to get through chapters 15 to 22 of 1 Samuel. That is 8 chapters. This is all about the early life of young David, the anointed king, one of the most crucial characters in the Old Testament. We also have an incredible special offer that you will not want to miss out just for you for Christmas. I'm going to go out there and say it. I think this is our best special offer yet. All right, so keep on listening. You do not want to miss out on that. So grab your Bible, grab your copy of the Thrive Daily Reading Guide, and let's get into 1 Samuel.
DJ, I'm sitting here looking at your dad's record.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at your dad's record, Johnny Payne Sings.
Yes.
And 2 shelves above, I'm looking at a canister that says Johnny Payne on it. Do you want to explain?
I love the fact that you've jumped in to start the podcast today.
I'm thinking that I might just move to doing this on my own.
I love it. The canister is my dad's ashes, late great Johnny Payne.
Yeah. And the record? Tell me about the record.
Well, the record, he recorded he
was a bit of a star, wasn't he?
Well, he back in the 60s and the 70s, he was. Imagine the Brat Pack.
Yeah,
you know, Frank Sinatra and all of those guys. Yeah. He was that touring around Australia.
Oh, he looks like it too.
Yeah,
what a classic. Have you put that onto digital format?
No,
why?
I know. I've got I've got someone lined up to do it. There's a handful of those still around. Those albums in Australia. I did buy a vinyl record player to do it myself, but it just wasn't up to scratch. So there are services out there that put vinyl onto. Hey, and dear listener, if you know of anybody who puts vinyl onto digital, let me know, and we can release Johnny Payne Sings to the world.
All right, come on, let's do it. What are we doing today?
We're not talking about my dad. We're talking about we're back in 1 Samuel. Where we left, 1 Samuel. Again, to give everybody an overview of what we're looking at, this is the period of about 3,000 years ago in history. This is 1,000 years before Christ, roughly. We have the period of Israel, ancient Israel, entering into the period of the early kings when they become kings. They go out of the judges, Samuel being the last judge, the priest Samuel, an incredibly godly figure in the Bible, right up there with Moses as far as a ruler and a judge for the nation of Israel. He is the last judge. He is, beholden to the people. They demand a king like the other people. So the 3 main characters that we have in the book of 1 Samuel is Samuel himself, the priest, as the last judge. Then we move into King Saul. And also, I'll get a major side character there is his son Jonathan, King Saul being the first king of Israel, and then we move into the next anointed king, which is King David. Yeah, so they're the major characters. So far we've looked at Samuel, we've looked at the rise of Saul, and now for this episode we're really looking at the emergence of this young guy David as God's chosen and the tragic crash.
I feel
Saul.
like in our last episode, it was like Saul was in the dock, and you were acting for the defense, and I was acting for the prosecution.
I'll be honest. I'll be honest here. In listening to it, I maybe fought for Saul a little bit too hard, but I think it's because, and Matt, this is getting a little bit philosophical now. When I read these stories, I am putting myself in their shoes.
Yeah.
So when I read the story of Saul, I see so much of myself in Saul. So that's maybe why I'm arguing for him, because the mistakes he makes are awful and horrible. But I feel, man, I've made those mistakes, and I used to read the Bible very judgmentally.
Yeah.
How could Saul do something? And then as I've matured and grown, I've realized, oh no, that's not the point of these stories. Yeah. The point of these stories is to realize that there's so much of Saul in me.
That's right, yeah. I think it seems harsh because it talks about, God rejecting Saul, and it's not a personal rejection. It's rejecting him as king. But one of the issues is how Saul responds to that.
Yeah.
He always has the opportunity to repent and turn back to God, but he never takes that. He sort of drives on, and as we're going to see in the next couple of episodes, it just gets worse and worse to the point where he is tormented.
Yes.
He's a tormented man.
Well, at the end of this, hopefully our goal, in this episode is to get to the point where I think, is one of the most crucial points in the story where Saul has gone too far.
Yeah.
That's the goal to get to in this one. But we're starting in 15.
That's right. So just a crucial background to this, because we're talking about kings now. The crucial background actually is Deuteronomy chapter 17.
Yes. And
just a couple of summary points out of Deuteronomy chapter 17. And this is an important principle of biblical interpretation. Whenever you're reading something, you always need to ask the question, what has been said about this already?
Yes.
Because everything builds on what came before, particularly key things like key moments where God makes promises, where God makes a covenant with his people and they're accompanied by promises. You need to remember some of those things. So a very important book that lies behind all of these narratives that we're going to read right to the end of 2 Kings is the book of Deuteronomy.
Oh, definitely. Outlines how they should be doing everything.
Yeah, that's right. So what has been said about the king? Well, what has been said is that basically what it depicts an approach to kingship is completely different to anything else in the nations around. So kings were not permitted to have, large cavalry. They weren't to amass wealth. Talks about do not amass horses or wealth. Do not have many wives. If that was just what you did in the ancient world to form foreign alliances. Yeah. You did that through marriage. And so it seems like in the instructions for kingship at the end of Deuteronomy 17, it's actually cutting off everything that was usual for kingship. And in fact, one of the key things was that the king was to be the lawmaker. The king was the lawmaker. And in many cultures, the king was seen as a divine figure, in every case above the law. But in Deuteronomy 17, we're told that the king is to be subject to that law and therefore subject to, in a sense, to those who are the guardians of that law, which is the prophet.
Yeah.
So the big issue in...
at the end, and to sum it up there, at the end of Deuteronomy 17, verse 20, it talks about the king, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers.
Yeah.
To recognize he is an equal there.
And that it's hard to overstate how incredibly countercultural that is.
Yes. But it's
we can look on that and say, that's reason, but that no one said that in the ancient, the king was inherently seen as being above everyone, if not divine.
Yeah.
And yet the Deuteronomistic law says he's not to consider himself better than any of his brothers.
But it's also interesting in reading through that again and going through it all and rereading a lot of it over the last couple of weeks in preparation of this, realizing that Moses had prophesied that there will be a king one day.
Yeah.
When the people get into their land and things are sorted out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It was interesting to me to go, wow, Samuel knew that.
Yeah.
But Samuel really kicked up against it.
Well, what he's kicking up against is they're wanting a nation, a king like all the other kings around them. I mean, he is, yes, there was provision for a king, but Samuel was the leader at the time. It's and he was the prophet, and that's why when they ask for a king, God has to, it's almost like he's talking Samuel down. Look, just calm down.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Because
it's not you they're rejecting.
No.
They're actually rejecting me.
And that's a good point, because Samuel even though he was sad about the way that it was going, it really wasn't really about the king. It was about, he knew their hearts.
Yeah.
He knew the people's hearts, and that they would drift off away.
Anyway.
Anyway.
So the issue, for example, in chapter 13, which is the first sort of moment, which really is the moment where God says, I'm choosing another king in Saul's place.
Yes.
And that has to do with this relationship between the king and the prophet. So the first issue in 1 Samuel 13, the first issue that arises, the first failure of Saul, is his failure to submit to the prophet in that sense. Not the prophet just as the prophet, but the prophet representing the command of God. And we get this again in chapter 15.
Yeah. So we're now at a place where again, this is all about Saul and Samuel. And this is a very crucial moment. Chapter 15 is a very crucial moment in the story. Samuel tells Saul that, they're to go against the Amalekites. Amalekites, sorry. And they're going to, and he says, look, the word of the Lord is, and one of these harsh ones for us today, wipe them out.
Yeah, well, and again, let's be reminded that it's the idea of herem, the concept of herem, which is when something is devoted completely to God, and it's often expressed in terms of this city or this people, are they completely devoted to destruction.
Yeah.
So remember, and this is going back to Joshua a little bit, because this is actually really important background for understanding what's the big deal here. Because a lot of people don't get this about 1 Samuel 15. It's like, hang on, what's the big deal here?
Yeah.
This is really harsh on Saul. Israel, from the time of Joshua and the invasion of the land, this was to be this kind of this prefigurative act of judgment, absolute act of judgment.
Yes.
Now, the king was to be the ultimate judge in the land in that sense, representing the rule of God. Ultimately, of course, the throne of Israel was to represent the throne of Christ.
Yes.
The one who will come to judge the living and the dead, right? And so there were certain situations in which such and such a city like Jericho, for example, was devoted to destruction. The word there is herem.
Yep.
It's a word invoking the idea of a sacrifice. It's like almost a sacred act of worship to God that you would carry this. And I know it's hard because this is something that applied then.
Yes.
Because of this prefigurative act of judgment, because the promised land represented as it was a prefiguration of the new heavens and the new earth. And so you have this act of judgment. So the responsibility of the king was to complete herem, was to complete this act of herem. Yeah. And one group of people that were under this herem edict were the Amalekites.
Yeah.
Because the Amalekites initially, because they attacked Israel when they came out of Egypt, and the covenant principle is those who curse you, I will curse. And so they were under this curse, and it was to be this edict of herem was to be carried out against them.
And it's important there's a point that you made in a previous episode many moons ago, and I think it's important to bring it up again. There's only ever been one sanctioned holy war from God.
Yeah.
And that was given to basically Moses and Joshua.
Yeah.
As they entered in.
That's right.
You need to wipe these people out. Again, the other side of it, and again, there are innocents there. There are, women and children in there as well. Yeah. But those cultures were devoted to demonic, evil practices, all sorts of perversion. And the holy war is continuing. Saul is in line, is
right.
Part of his role as the king is to pick up where Joshua and Caleb and the crew and the judges left off.
That's right, because it was unfinished. It was left unfinished.
So it's not like this is a new war. This is a continuation of the thing.
That's right. That's a very good point.
That will continue and finally be finished in the life of David.
Yeah, that's right. So this happens. You're absolutely right. Once in history.
Yeah,
and it is going to happen again, but the fulfillment of it is going to happen again. And we read about that in Revelation chapter 19 when Christ comes to bring judgment. So, and it's interesting to note because, of course, David is the one who's really going to finish. He's going to show himself willing to finish. And he does finish off this. And But it's interesting to note that when David says to God, I'm going to build you a temple, and this is recorded in the Chronicles version, God says, no, you're a man of blood, you're a man of war, you've spilt too much blood, you can't build me a temple. So it's like, it's almost like this necessary evil.
That's a great point.
That it's not like what God ultimately wanted, so much so that David, who obediently completed this, it's like, no, sorry, mate.
Still forfeited out of God's ultimate.
That's right, sorry, but you've got blood on your hands. I mean, it's like you did what had to be done, but
there is
I want my temple, and think of the symbolism involved in the temple, and I guess the son of David, the idea of the son of David building the temple, there's Jesus building the church, and God says it's not for you to build a temple because you belong to this thing, but I want the temple builder to be a man of peace, a prince of peace. It's rich.
Let's jump back into 1 Samuel 15.
Yes,
That's all the background.
That's all the background.
We got so many chapters to get through. We got all that background there. So Saul Samuel prophesies, gets a message from the Lord and says, listen, you got to go to war. This is your next stage. Amalekites, destruction, go.
Yeah.
Saul says, great, raises a great army, goes up against King Agag.
Yeah.
Agag, the Amalekite king. And, and again, it's very important. The word of the Lord through Samuel said, you have to wipe them all out.
Yeah.
And then we get, that Saul and his crew spared the king's life and kept the best of the sheep, the goats, the cattle, the fat calves, the lambs, everything, in fact, that appealed to them. They destroyed only what was worthless and of poor quality. Then we get a wonderful meanwhile. Meanwhile, Samuel's kicking back with the Lord, and the Lord says, I am sorry that I ever made Saul king, for he has not been loyal to me. And so Samuel goes out, and we have this amazing confrontation at the town of Carmel.
Where, by the way, it says in verse 12 of chapter 15, Samuel went up to meet Saul, but he was told, Saul has gone to Carmel. There he has set up a monument in his own honor.
Yeah, so, just in passing.
Yeah.
So there's issues going on.
Yeah, so
here.
there are clearly issues going. So this is, it's not just the action that is problematic here.
Yeah.
It's Saul is setting himself up in such a way as to be above the law, and this is Saul, in a sense, building a Tower of Babel out of his own identity.
And dare we think, and I don't want to get into the application too early, but I tell you what, this is a great application to anybody in leadership. You lead in a team.
Yeah.
You don't lead by yourself. You can't walk out there and go, hey, God told me to do this.
Yeah.
I'm now, when the rest of the team is saying, hang on, no, type of thing. And so this is basically what we see. We get a great scene, like it's such a vivid scene of Samuel coming up saying, g'day, and Saul saying, hey, I've done everything.
Yeah.
Hey, look at this. We won. We did everything right. And Samuel being so.
No, you didn't.
So hang on. What's that I hear in my ears? The bleating of these sheep and the goats.
Because they took like lots of things out of that. And I mean, now let's go back to Jericho. Achan just took one thing, of all that was devoted to destruction. One small thing. These guys have taken heaps of stuff out of there, and that was all devoted to destruction. And the problem here is that this was a sacred duty.
Yeah.
This had religious significance, and so this is a big.
Oh, it's a big
problem.
step. This is the first major crack in Saul's. Well, this is the major cutaway here. So they have a conversation, and basically Saul is telling him what the Lord is saying, and Samuel is saying to Saul, King Saul, what the Lord is saying, that he is now cut off. Saul has a chance to repent, but doesn't. He makes excuses.
Yeah.
Great, another great lesson in leadership. Makes excuses, but I did obey the Lord.
Yeah.
You hear this petulance in his voice, and we took this, me and our men, we took all this because we wanted to sacrifice all these good things and it's like, really? Really? Yeah. And so Samuel pronounces judgment over him, and then as he's told that he is rejected king, it's only then that Saul pleads for forgiveness and actually agrees. So he realized that all of that stuff beforehand was a big fat lie, because then Saul actually says at the end, he goes, I did disobey.
Yeah. Well, and this is, acting for the prosecution, as I said. But just first of all, a note, verse 23, part of that judgment is because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Yeah. So remember, this is it's not the personal thing. It's rejected as king, okay? Now, in verse 30, when Saul, as you say, he replies, he says, I have sinned. But note what he then says for the prosecution here. Yep. But please honor me before the elders of my people and before Israel. Come back with me so that I may worship the Lord your God. Now, the issue here is that Samuel is this massively revered prophet. Now, remember when he went down to Jesse's hometown, and everyone trembles at Samuel. Yeah. Why have you come here?
God's man.
Yeah, he's God's man, right? Yeah. So for God's man to be saying this, rebuking the king, that's really dangerous for his position as king, because he will lose the confidence of the army, and if he loses the confidence of the army, he's lost his power. Yeah. And so he now is in a really he's been essentially shamed in a sense, and he
massively
wants
so.
Just before, it says that he set up a monument in his own honor, okay? Now he's saying in verse 30, please honor me before the elders. Yeah. Okay. So what is he acting for the prosecution? What is Saul? And feel free to act for the defense here.
I will. I will.
But
it's getting hard.
What is Saul really concerned about here? He's concerned about his honor before the elders.
He's now become a king. He's let me go one step further. Let me go into meddling. He's concerned about politics.
Yeah.
He's concerned about what the people are. What are the newspapers going to say the next day? Well, at least be seen with me going to worship.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right. Yeah.
And like I'm going to be covered my bases now.
And it's not that he didn't do good things. I mean, we have a summary back at the end of chapter 14 and 47. It says about Saul, wherever he turned, he inflicted punishment on their enemies, and he fought valiantly and he defeated the Amalekites. So it's not denying that he did good things, but this is a key failure.
Even in that verse at the end of that bit there, verse 31. So Samuel finally agreed to go back with him, and Saul worshipped the Lord.
Yeah.
So as I'll act as a defendant,
okay,
acting as a defendant, he was genuine. There was a genuine part of him.
It doesn't say that he was genuine. It just says that he went through the motions.
Hey, I don't see that. I think you're reading between the lines there. Your Honour. We need a time out. No, okay. Now I hinted at this in the last episode.
So we offered the sacrifices and all of that stuff. Good on you, Saul.
I hinted at it's going to be harder to defend him as we go on. I hinted at this in the last episode. Now we get, and it's only a couple of verses long, one of my favourite stories about Samuel, because Samuel then says, right, bring King Agag to me. Now, this is the priest. This is God's man. This is the holy man. Says, and Agag arrived full of hope, for he thought, surely the worst is over and I've been spared. But Samuel said, as the sword has killed the sons of many mothers, now your mother will be childless. This is one of my favourite lines in the Old Testament. And Samuel cut Agag to pieces before the Lord at Gilgal.
Oh, goodness me!
I think in the King James it says,
is this the adolescent? Hey, let me just ask you a question. This is the adolescent DJ Payne coming out here.
I'm still that adolescent, because I think the old King James.
What would Johnny Payne there say about that?
I think he'd love it as well. I think the original King James is, and Samuel hacked Agag to pieces. That is, but the fact it is before the Lord, and this is, and again, I'm playing up the gruesome part of it, but the lesson here is that, Samuel is going to do the faithful thing in getting rid of the sin out of the camp. Yeah. And it is
he's the instrument of the Lord's judgment.
Yeah.
As you said, this is a one-off.
Yes.
But he's willing to do what is necessary in this. Yeah.
And we get a very sad little conclusion here to the chapter. Samuel never met with Saul again after they worshipped together, and he mourned constantly for him.
Yeah.
So Samuel, Samuel had a heart for Saul. There's my other bit of the defense there.
It's interesting.
Your Honour.
It says here. That's good. Okay. as you said, it's going to get harder to defend Saul.
It will.
Yeah, but give it a red hot go. The last line there is interesting, isn't it? And the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. Yeah. And this raises this sort of question with us classic theological abstract thinkers. Yeah. Oh, hang on, but did the Lord make a mistake here? Did God change his mind? You get all of these sorts of questions. The biblical narrative always depicts a sense of genuine interaction between God and his people. Yes. So this, what we would call an anthropomorphic way of describing God and these interactions, are important for adding a genuine sense of relational interaction between God and his people. So there is real. It's not that God was surprised, or it's not making a theological statement. It's an expression of, in as much as Samuel mourned, so was God. Yeah, actually. Yeah. So was God, and Samuel's mourning is as the prophet is indicative of the heart of God for Saul. Now that Saul was, and the issue here is Saul isn't responding. No. Saul isn't responding, and God is grieved by that. Yeah. This is again part of my defense. How many times have I justified my sin before the Lord? Yeah. How many times have I said, no, I've actually been obeying you, God? Yeah. And this is why I read into it and go, oh man. Yeah. Samuel really wanted this to work out though. And I think there's the human part of him as well. Because it's interesting that, Samuel was really reticent, wasn't he, at the start to anoint this king. And yet he's really upset about this. Yeah. And so much so at the start of chapter 16, it says the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, since I've rejected him as king over Israel? Yeah. Like, come on, Samuel, get over this. We got work to do here, bud. Yeah. The next one is it. And so let's go fast. Let's go pretty quickly through this. Yep. This is our introduction to David. Young, ruddy, the youngest of the 8 sons of Jesse. He's out there. We get this amazing story of Samuel, the Lord taking Samuel to the house of Jesse, who is the grandson of Ruth and Boaz. Yep. So to bring that picture in there, the grandson of Ruth and Boaz, we have him there with his sons. And again, we have this the lesson here is every time one of the elder sons come in, they're beautiful, handsome, tall, like King Saul. Samuel's like, oh, well, this has got to be the guy. God's saying, no. And they wait for this, the youngest of the family, the ruddy runt of the litter, the rough kid from who's a young shepherd. And David comes in and God says, this is the one. Right. So this is all set up in contrast, and this is a story of contrast throughout the narrative here. In this first book of Samuel, we're going to see constant contrast between Saul and David. Now, one of the points of contrast, if you go back to that moment where Saul was formally recognized as king, where Samuel presents him before the people. Remember, he's hiding among the baggage and they bring him out. And there's a statement made there where they saw that he was a great, strong man, that he was a head taller than everyone else. And that's right. And Samuel says, see the Lord, see the one, is there anyone like him among, the statement here in chapter 16, verse 7, is set in deliberate contrast to that statement earlier about Saul, that he was, look at him, look how tall he is. Is there anyone else among, where he's compared to everyone else and he's seen to be bigger and stronger than everyone else. And yet here, the Lord said to Samuel in verse 7 of chapter 16, do not consider his appearance or his height. Okay, so it's deliberately in contrast to what was said previously about Saul. For I've rejected him. Yeah. Again, not rejecting him personally, but as king. The Lord does not look at the things that people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So that is in deliberate contrast. God is looking for a worshipper, not the classic ancient Near Eastern strongman king. Yeah, it's interesting. Just a note here, because clearly David knows, has a real heart for God. Yeah. This, I think, connects with the legacy of, you mentioned Boaz and Ruth. Boaz in the time of the judges is clearly a godly man in a time of unfaithfulness. That's right. He's righteous and just. That because even this time of Samuel, I mean, Samuel brings about some reforms and is bringing people back to God. But it's interesting to note here that, Jesse and his family, that they're a God-fearing family, so that David is, brought up with this benefiting from this legacy that comes all the way from Boaz.
Definitely. So we fast forward, and this is, you'll notice that, 16, 17, 18, and this is the point that I've made before, these books aren't exactly chronological because you sort of get these multiple
sections within the books.
The sections. You get these multiple introductions to, hang on, does Saul already know David? Does David and Jonathan? You get a little bit of that. We don't know exactly how it lies in chronologically.
Well, it underscores the fact that the organization of the material has some thematic theological purpose.
Yeah.
And the next story is a classic example of that, because this is where we have this evil spirit from the Lord.
God's
this
in
evil
control.
spirit.
God's in control.
That's right. And because we've seen this before in the case of Jehoshaphat, Micaiah the prophet has this. It's Ahab and Jehoshaphat, and
God sends
Micaiah,
a lying spirit.
Yeah, that's right. God. There's this lying spirit that says, "Let me go and be a lying spirit in the mouths of the prophets to bring Ahab to his doom." Right?
Wow.
And God says, "Yes, okay, go." So this lying spirit has to get God's permission. So God uses the lying spirit for His purposes to bring down Ahab. Well, this is what's happening here. So God is allowing or using this lying spirit to bring, to bring something to a head here. Yeah, that's right.
And again, I think this, I might be reading too much in it here. Whereas modern readers will come to this with thoughts of mental illness and descend into craziness, and we definitely get some crazy behavior in this. But I believe. And we sort of poo-poo the spiritual realm that can affect people, can affect mental illness. I think sometimes the two can go,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Two go together.
Yeah.
Chicken and the egg, don't know which one comes first.
Yeah.
But here, Saul has it's like the Romans, it's the Romans chapter 1 type of thing.
Yeah.
Saul rejects God's plan for himself, so God lets him over,
gives him over
to what he wants, and he descends into. We're going to see as we keep on going. Saul is going to descend into a type of madness that is being tormented, brought on by this tormenting by this.
It's
spirit.
like his ambition and his desire for glory becomes a foothold. For this demonic, spirit, and so and God allows this to bring this. But here's the thing: see. What this shows, and this is because we go from this is interesting, we go from this story straight into the David and Goliath story.
The most famous.
And a lot of people know the David and Goliath story, but the placement of even though this probably happened after,
yes,
yet it's put before because it shows something about David. So here is Saul the strong man, unable to resist these spiritual powers, and yet David comes in with his harp, plays his harp, and it says that the spirit left Saul. So it's right at the end of that section, last verse in chapter 16. Whenever the spirit from God came on Saul, David would take up his lyre and play. Then relief would come to Saul. He would feel better, and the evil spirit would leave him. So David, through his worship, vanquishes this spirit. And, of course, playing the harp had this connection.
Yes.
And music had this connection with worship.
And David is a man of worship and music and prayers and, poetry. He's an artist as well as a warrior there. I look, Matt.
That leads into chapter 17,
which is the most famous chapter. Yeah. Everybody knows the story about David and Goliath. I don't know how much we have to go into it again here because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Do we just go right? We all know the story of David and Goliath. David comes in.
There's a few things to say about it. So, we'll do big picture because it's the big picture stuff that's important here.
All right. We're going to be back with the big picture. With the big fella and with the big fella Goliath here in just a moment on Thrive Deeper. Thrive family. It's your old mate, DJ Payne, or should I say Santa Claus here. I'm feeling a bit like Santa. I know I've got the beard for it, and yes, smarty trousers. At the moment, I do have the stomach for it as well. But listen. We have got an amazing offer just for you for Christmas. This, I'm going to go out on record here, this is the most exciting offer that we've ever had. And I think I'm actually going to be ordering it myself. Okay, now check this out. As you've heard, Matthew, Jacoby, and myself consider C.S. Lewis to be one of the greatest, literally one of the most important Christian writers in the modern era. C.S. Lewis, if you've never gotten into his works and you've been thinking one day I'll get into C.S. Lewis, one day I'll get those books that I need to get, let me tell you, we have got the offer for you. This is an exclusive offer of the complete C.S. Lewis signature classics. What does that mean? This is 7 of his finest books on Christianity, can be all yours in a beautiful slipcase, in a beautiful new collection. It's absolutely gorgeous. The books are Mere Christianity, The Screwtape Letters, Surprised by Joy, The Four Loves, The Problem of Pain, The Great Divorce, and Miracles. These 7 books will change your life. Now, you might be thinking, hey, I've already got these on my shelf at home. But if you're anything like me, I've got a great library of great books, and I'm constantly lending them out, and my books just disappear. So I think this is going to be my Christmas present to a lot of friends out there. I think I'm going to be buying this for a lot of friends out there because this is a beautiful present that will literally change someone's life. Now, I've seen this collection for over $100 in the stores. Recommended retail price is $90 to $100. We are able to get it to you for $72. Only $72. But listen, it's only for Australia and it's only for a strictly limited time. This is for you to buy right now for Christmas. So if you think this is an amazing offer, all you need to do is head over to thrivetoday.tv. thrivetoday.tv. You will see a special listeners offer. Click on that and that will take you to the fantastic complete C.S. Lewis signature classics. 7 books for only $72. Now, this very special offer is only good for Australia. If you've got shipping in Australia, we can do it. Sorry, international listeners, we can't get this one to you. But if you're in Australia or you know someone in Australia you want to ship this to, let us know and we can do it for you. This is a fantastic Christmas gift. If you're sitting there thinking what to buy someone, hey, we've just solved your problem. The complete C.S. Lewis signature classics. I think I'm going to be purchasing a couple here myself for presents. Get a hold of it over at thrivetoday.tv. Let's get back into the life of David in 1 Samuel. Thrive Deeper, DJ and Matt with you, and we are literally putting our foot on the gas as we go through 1 Samuel. We're in chapter 17, I would say one of the most famous chapters in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. It's the story of David and Goliath.
That's right. So as soon as we hear about this giant, basically is what he is, we need to allow that to trigger our memory of Numbers chapter 13.
Yes.
Okay, so that generation of Israelites, they spied out the land. They wouldn't go in. Why? Because there are these giant people in the land.
And that's a throwback to Genesis,
And Numbers 13.
Well, no, even Genesis 6.
That's right, Genesis 6, right.
Because they refer to them as Nephilim. This is a whole other spiritual element going on here.
So this is a Numbers 13 moment, basically.
Yeah.
And what we see here, and again, remember the comparison. So Saul, when this large Philistine guy comes out with, and he's for 40 days he's doing this. Saul is trembling. Saul and the army are trembling in the tent. So they're like the 10 spies. Yes. This is deliberate. They're like the 10 spies, and David is the one that is the Caleb Joshua character here. There's an interesting. There's a book that was written by Malcolm Gladwell Malcolm Gladwell is a journalist, secular journalist. He's not a Christian as far as I know. He wrote a book called David and Goliath, and the thesis of the book is that it's not an underdog story in any sense, that David actually was always the stronger man in the story, because, and his argument goes that Goliath had some growth deformity that made him slow, uncoordinated, and probably blind.
Wow.
Or half blind.
Okay.
And David, as the slingsman, was, he talks about, slingers in those days and how, that they were really accurate, pinpoint accuracy. And it was like he might as well have been holding a gun. Yeah. So it was like, holding a gun against a big uncoordinated giant. And so he says, and the point of the book is that, well, anyway, we don't need to go on the point of the book. But it's interesting, because lots of Christians have read this book, and there have been messages getting out there. Oh, yeah, no, it's not an underdog. It's actually, no, David was actually the stronger one in this story. Can we not let Malcolm Gladwell interpret this story for all, because what the text wants us to see is that, Goliath is the strong man. The Philistines would not have sent.
Yes.
Because the challenge is, if you beat me, we will all
become your slaves.
Yeah. There's no way that the Philistines would have sent out an uncoordinated, half-blind guy if they didn't think he could beat anyone.
I'll take it one step further. From historical records that we have and what a lot of historians will say, and I've mentioned it before, the Philistines were advanced technology. And we even have a point that the writer here makes a point of all of the Bronze Age armor that he's wearing in comparison to these useless...
Everyone had bronze. It was the iron.
Yes.
It was the iron-tipped...
Yeah. They've got this advanced technology. Basically, they're saying... They're rolling out a superior weapon with a superior soldier.
So that the iron tip on his, and this is the details, and we don't want to get too much into the details, but that would pierce any bronze armor. Yeah. That was the point. The Philistines had moved into the Iron Age ahead of anyone else, so they had superior weaponry. They had weaponry that could pierce the armor of anything that they were facing, right? So, because, remember David puts on Saul's armor here in the story, and David says, no, I'm not going to wear it. Would have been useless anyway against that iron-tipped spear. Yeah. So, so David... And the other thing is, yes, David would have been an accomplished slingsman, but he does pick up 5 stones, indicating that he doesn't know how God's going to deliver him out of that situation.
Yes.
So he doesn't know that he's going to hit the first time.
It's an interesting point, picking up the 5 stones. I've heard multiple people bring up the point that later on we find out that the Goliaths has brothers, has relatives in, as we go through the Old Testament. And I've heard some preachers make a big point of the 5 stones were, for Goliath's brother. Again.
Well, it doesn't say that. It doesn't. Anyway, it doesn't. Yeah, okay.
I love that. I don't know, and I say that because I know that you there listening at home are going, "Oh yeah, he picked up the 5 stones because Goliath has got 4 brothers." Again, it doesn't say that.
Yeah, it doesn't say that. It's honestly, it's not important.
Yeah,
but but I think it does. What it does say is that he picked up 5 stones, and I think the most natural way to understand that is that he's
ready for battle.
He's going to take a few shots.
Yeah.
But when he hits him on the first shot, it's like, oh wow, God's really
God guided the stone.
Yeah, that's right.
God guided the stone. That's the whole point of it. We so we get this amazing picture of David as a young man, as a young shepherd, holding up not only the head of Goliath, but using his own sword to cut him off.
That's right. I've got the Caravaggio painting
beautiful.
in my head,
and holding it up, and then Saul basically says, who is this kid? And Abner, we're introduced to Abner as well. Abner being Saul's right-hand man, as far as the military goes, the commander of the army says, I have no idea who this kid is. And they go make inquiries and they find out that he is the son of Jesse.
Yeah.
And that is chapter 17. Yeah. So moving into, I'm trying to fast forward here.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's the big picture. So, David is the Joshua Caleb here. He's the one that's, willing to move into the land, conquer the land.
Yeah. We go into Samuel 18, and this is a very important part. And there's a couple of things I want to reference here, Matt. Right at the beginning of Samuel 18, as Saul and David are establishing their relationship, he meets Jonathan, the king's son.
Yeah,
and Jonathan. I love the way that the New Living Translation puts it. There was an immediate bond between them, for Jonathan loved David, and from that day on, David lived with Saul, Jonathan was there, and there was immediate friendship, between the two. We'll get parts of that story as we go along here. Yeah. There's a Jonathan obviously sees that David is anointed by God, to be a future
which is
leader.
Remarkable because Jonathan is the heir to the throne. So he and we know that he's a godly man, Jonathan.
Yeah.
And here's another contrast. Again, this is a book of contrasts. So Jonathan is contrasting his father, whereas Saul is going to, and this is what we're going to see in this chapter, just becomes paranoid about David. The women are singing these songs. Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands, and Saul is just seething in jealousy, feeling massively threatened by David. The contrast to that is Jonathan, who is, who's closer to David's age, who is the legitimate heir to the throne as things stand.
Yes,
that is legitimate, just in
the world,
human terms,
the
worldly terms. He is the one actually that should have been even more threatened by David, and yet he enters into this covenant with David and recognizes him as the Lord's anointed.
Now, I love the story of Jonathan and David. It's one of the richest stories in the Old Testament about a beautiful friendship. Again, tragic ending. We'll get there when we get there.
Yeah.
But there has been much made in the days that we live in now, with people pushing different agendas, with lifestyle choices and things like that. I'm being very careful around my words. And I've heard multiple preachers and pastors talk about the love relationship, the loving relationship. They hug.
It was a homosexual relationship between Jonathan and David.
Yep.
It's in the context of the Old Testament, and you have to read a text in its context. That is such an anachronism, and by that I mean it's reading a modern sensibility into a text which in its context would have been completely out of I can't even think of strong enough words to put it. It's not even
hinted at.
Not even hinted at. Because remember, the text is concerned is the whole point of the text is it's showing that these were godly men, and nothing could be clearer from the law than that option was completely ruled out. That is an impossible interpretation.
Thank you for stating that very clearly. We get in chapter 18. We get basically David becoming more and more popular. We have an amazing moment. Basically, David is young David working in Saul's army is like has the Midas touch. Everything he does turns to gold. Yeah. David continued to succeed in everything he did with the Lord was with him. This is a very damning verse in verse 15. When Saul recognized that God was with David, he became even more afraid of him.
Yeah.
And shows you where Saul's heart is really drifting away from the Lord here.
So he's going to still oppose David, even though he recognizes that God is doing this. He's going to consciously fight against it.
Yeah.
That's pretty full on.
And we get one of the early machinations here of King Saul's plan to have David come unstuck is, yes, you can marry my daughter. I just need 100 Philistine.
Well, it's interesting that he thinks
foreskins.
Saul's plan here is to use his daughter to mislead David. He thinks, because as what we know from later on is, there's a story about her name, Micah. She, she remembered the story about she hides an idol in the bed.
Yes.
You think, what? There's an idol.
Yeah.
Like she's got these. She's an idolater, and Saul probably thinks, I'll mislead. This is Saul doing what Balaam did earlier, in Numbers 24 moment here, where we'll send in these women to actually, if we can't kill them, the Israelites, we'll send in the women to mislead them.
Yeah.
This is exactly now what Saul is doing. That was his plan. Now, as it turns out, she falls in love with David. Yeah.
Well,
and David isn't swayed.
It's an interesting point. David has this attitude throughout it, because this isn't the first daughter. The oldest daughter, Saul's already thinking, I can use my oldest daughter with David. He's got this thing. David has an attitude of, I'm a humble servant.
Yeah.
I'm a poor shepherd.
Yeah.
I have nothing to give you for your daughter, so don't even consider me. So Saul goes, it doesn't work. And then he finds out that Micah, there's actually a spark between him, her and David.
Yeah.
And he's like, this might actually work. And he comes up with this thing. And again, David has the same attitude. I'm sorry, I'm a poor person.
So he makes him earn it.
He makes him earn it. Right. How can I do this? 100 foreskins from the Philistines, that's surely going to kill him.
Yeah.
He can't do that. That's impossible. Yeah. David comes back with 200. So...
Yeah. That's right. And again, verse 21, I will give her to him, he thought, so that she may be a snare to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him.
Yeah.
Now that evokes this idea of, the ungodly Canaanites being a snare to the Israelites. It evokes
and Saul being totally
Numbers 24, the women that mislead the Israelites. It evokes Samson as well, with the Philistines being misled by the. It
even with Saul's machinations here with his daughters, with the first daughter giving her into marriage to some guy from Mahol, it's like, he's already into the king thing of marrying in.
Yeah, that's right.
And gaining power from that.
Yeah.
So Saul is. This is where the defense.
This is where your defense really breaks down. You're going to be clutching at straws.
It's going against him now. So the Philistines attack. David is more successful. So we end chapter 18 with David.
And it just gets worse. David's on the rise.
David's on the rise. Saul now is out and out just trying to kill David.
Yeah.
We have an amazing story of Jonathan. Looking after him.
Yeah. Saul's keen to send David out because he thinks surely he's going to get killed in war. I mean, because he's still a young man, right? He's still not the great, even though he's had success. That's because what the Lord's doing. But Saul just believes that if he keeps sending him out to battle, surely one of these days he's going to get killed. That's what he's hoping for.
Yeah.
But David keeps winning these victories.
Jonathan is helping. His wife is helping.
Yeah.
In the household here. David, seeks refuge in different places. And it's interesting to note that the point that you just made, Matt, there, I just want to keep in the back of people's minds. David experiences time and time again this plot against him from Saul.
Yeah.
Put him into battle. He's surely going to get killed in battle.
Yeah.
That might come back to haunt David later on. David might have that sitting in his head because again, as we know the life of, if anybody knows the life of David, we know that David falls into the same.
Yes, rightio.
So David experiences multiple times.
I love a good cross reference. That's a good one. So we should point out too that there are these moments here where Saul, tormented by the evil spirit, is constantly trying to spear David, and David keeps eluding this. So Saul is out to kill him. Interesting. It says there in the. Sorry, I'm going backwards here. I know you want to move forwards.
Yeah.
But it talks about. Saul is tormented by the evil spirit and prophesying.
Yes. Well, that's the end of chapter 19. We have this crazy moment with chapter 19, where Saul's chasing after him. He keeps sending people out. They keep getting to this place where the prophets are, and they all become prophets.
Yeah.
Then finally Saul goes out, and he starts prophesying with them again, hearkening back to the early stage of when he was a young king.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and it's like. What is this actually happening?
Yeah, well, so David escapes, as the story goes. David escapes, and Saul sends his men after him because he's taken refuge with the prophets. And each time the men go, they start prophesying, and then finally Saul goes and he prophesies, as you said. So the thing here is that God is doing something. Yeah. It's God's sovereignty here. God is. And this is indicative of what's going to happen from here on. in essence, what this divine act is saying is that whatever people do, I'm going to use it for my purposes. Even though they've come here and they're doing this for the wrong reasons, I'm going to use, I'm going to work all things for the good of those who love me, to cite Romans 8:28. And so I think that this act of God in causing the army and then finally Saul to prophesy when they come to seek David out is indicative of this, of what's going to happen from here on. You might do this, but I'm actually going to use.
Yes.
You are going to be an instrument in my hands.
Yeah.
Whether you want to, or not.
Yeah.
This is the sovereignty of God at work here.
We go to chapter 20, and I'm really flying through now. Chapter 20 is a very an amazing action-packed movie story of David and Jonathan working together. It's the one with Jonathan, shooting the arrows, finding out if his father's really going to kill him. David says, "Man, your dad is going to kill me." Jonathan says, "It's not that bad." Jonathan realizes it is.
In fact, Jonathan. He tries to kill Jonathan as well.
Yeah.
And so, he thinks, oh man, my dad is crazy. Now, the thing here is that this is Saul's paranoia, because the reason why he attacks Jonathan is that he thinks that Jonathan has sided with David against him.
He has, but not against him.
They're good friends. That's right. They're really good friends. So he just believes that they're siding together and conspiring to bring him down. Now they are good friends, but they're not conspiring to bring Saul down. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway,
so we get this amazing story where Jonathan and David are not conspiring, but laying out the course of what to do. They're giving advice, and we have this beautiful, tearful goodbye. Because they realize things are getting really harsh, and these two are such best friends that both of them are in tears. Yeah. And at last, Jonathan said to David, "This is at the end of chapter 20." "Go in peace, for we have sworn loyalty to each other in the Lord's name, and the Lord is witness of the bond between us and of our children forever."
Yeah, that's right.
And
so David flees. He goes to this place called Nob or Nov, or I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Yeah. In Hebrew, it's a city. It's not a Levitical city, but it's evidently a city where where the priests live. It's where the high priest lives. Yeah. It's just northeast of Jerusalem, actually, on Mount Scopus.
Yes.
And so it's an interesting because David asks for the sacred bread.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing. It's actually referred to in the Gospels.
Jesus
refers to it because it was legitimate. David was, it could be used for legitimate purposes like that.
Yes.
But this also is saying something about David, the fact that he's given the sacred bread, and it says something about his position as the Lord's anointed.
Yeah.
But as the story goes, he receives help from the priests, and then Saul comes in, and it's a bloodbath.
Well, because
there's actually, and to cut a long story short, Saul massacres the priests.
Yes,
has the priests massacred. Even the men, when Saul goes in, then he questions them, and then he commands his men, "We'll cut the priests down." They're like, "No way, we're not going to do it." And there's only this Canaanite guy, a Dog. His name is
Doeg the Edomite. Saul's chief herdsman was there that day, and so David's got one eye on him, going, "Oh, I don't trust this guy." But listen,
well, he's the one that tells that David was there.
Yeah,
and because the soldiers aren't willing to cut down the priests, but Doeg the Edomite is willing to do that. So this is the lowest moment. Saul massacres.
Yeah, this is chapter 22. Yeah. This is chapter 22. This is. We've seen, Samuel, cut Saul off and said, "This is the judgment upon you." Yeah. Now we see, I would say the lowest point for Saul, because David is not...
I've skipped ahead a little bit there.
That's all right. That's right. Yeah. David is hiding out, takes his father and mother to live with relatives there in Moab. Yeah. He hides out, different things, and finally Saul does all his homework, gets all the information, has his spies working and everything like that. And then he goes to this priest in that area, the priest of Nob there. And so Saul is going in. And even though Ahimelech, the priest, is so respectful and so, honouring of Saul and really lays it out perfectly what God has told him to do, there's a bloodbath. It is.
Verse 13, Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of?" So he just thinks everyone's against him. Yeah. This is absolute paranoia, and it's like Stalin, Stalin's purges, isn't it? He's just gone. It's absolutely mad, and he's willing to. Verse 17. Verse 16, the king said, "You will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family." This is the high priest.
Yeah.
This is the high priest. Yeah. It's like, then the king ordered the guards at his side, "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord," because they too have sided with David. But it says, but the king's officials were unwilling to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. So he makes this pagan guy do it. It's just, this is madness. It's this low point.
85 priests in all, still wearing their priestly garments.
Yeah.
And then they went to the town, killed the priests' families, the men, the women, the children, the babies, and all of the cattle, the donkeys, sheep, and goats.
Yeah. So he actually carries out herem. He had refused to do it against the Amalekites, but he's now willing to do it for his own purposes here against a high priestly family and this town of the key priests. It's just this is the lowest moment. As soon as you get here, you think, this guy, this is pure evil at this point.
It's like one of the judges' moments where the people, and this is the king of the God's people, is not just, is either just as bad or even worse than the surrounding evil nations around them. Yeah. He's doing something worse. So we have one son of the priest Ahimelech escapes. Yeah. He flees to David, wise move, and he told David all that had happened. David exclaimed, "I knew it," when I saw that Edomite there, that he was going to tell Saul. Now I have caused, this is the beautiful heart of David, I have caused the death of all of your father's family. Stay here with me. Don't be afraid. I will protect you with my own life, for the same person wants to kill us both.
That's right.
So we see the difference there of David willing to be, to bring people in.
That's right. And Saul, makes things worse here, because now David is essentially, what this means is that David is legitimized by the presence of the heir to the high priest.
Yeah.
So Abiathar, who is now the high priest upon the death of, after Saul killed his father. So now that he's with David, that kind of legitimizes David, because the king and the priest relationship was to be a close
really
one.
Important one.
He's got the person there with whom he can, even though God is communicating with David through the prophet Gad, through Samuel, but there's also now the priest here. So he's got the key prophets with him. Yeah. Gad and Samuel. Yes. He's got the high priest now, Abiathar, with him. This is basically David is legitimized in a sense, sort of behind the scenes in a sense. Saul is driving everyone away. He's completely sabotaging his own rule. Yeah. He's only really got the men of Benjamin at the start of that. When he meets with his men, he refers to them as men of Benjamin. It's basically his own tribesmen. Yeah, he's got his own circle. And everyone else is like, we're not hanging with this guy.
Yeah, the rest of the people, though they recognize him as king, they're falling in love with David. Now, this is the beginning of, we're going, oh my goodness, could it get any worse for David? Well, it does get worse for David. This is the beginning of David fleeing, running in the wilderness years for him, and we're going to get into that in the next episode. But as we finish this one, Matt, I think you stand in a really unique position to be able to speak to this because of your in-depth study, work, love of, and singing of the Psalms. Overlay because we can basically read these stories and go, Well, we know what David's thinking and feeling because he wrote it all down and he sung it all. So what is David experiencing here as he's fleeing from Saul at this beginning stage here? He's not even king yet.
Yeah, and it's just terrible what's going on. And this is where actually the Psalms, I think, can give us a real insight into what's happening inside David. Yeah. And the Psalms show us that. Now, we could easily think he's just really calm and calm and confident and, the Lord bless Saul and no, he's not only does he suffer massive grief during this time, but he's angry. Yeah. Like this massive injustice this guy's killed all of these priests. Yes. He's driven him out. Yeah. He's trying to chase and kill not only David, but his whole family. Yeah.
And his best mate Jonathan as well, Saul's own son.
Let me tell you, there's some fiery psalms, like really fiery psalms, where David is angry and taking his anger to God, saying, God, destroy my enemy. Now, we might say, hang on, but, are we meant to be vengeful, pray vengeful prayers? Well, and the tendency is to say, well, that's sort of Old Testament vengeful prayers kind of stuff. All the Psalms that pray vengeance on my enemies. Well, Paul says in Romans chapter 12, do not repay evil with evil, because, and he quotes from the Old Testament, because vengeance is mine, says the Lord. Yeah. So what David's doing in these Psalms, where he's praying for God's judgment upon Saul, is he's saying, okay, vengeance is yours, Lord. I won't be the judge. Yep. He's handing judgment over to God.
Love it.
He's taking his anger to God. You can't just deal this. Naturally, he's going to be angry. It's what you do with your anger that matters. What does he do? He takes it to God. He says, okay, God, what are you going to do about this? And so what we see in the Psalms is that this isn't an easy, this is a struggle for David, but he has that struggle out with God. This is a man who wrestles with God, to use the picture of Jacob wrestling with God. He is wrestling with God all the way through this, and that is what God loves the most. That is the heart of David that God wants. Struggle, God says, absolutely, life can be a struggle, but make sure you do that struggle with me.
Now, this is why this journey with David is going to be so much fun, if I'm allowed to use that word, so deep and so wonderful doing it with our beloved Matthew Jacoby. Why? Because this man lives and breathes the Psalms. He's been doing it for decades, and he's going to shine so much light on this life of King David. I love being able to read the story of David alongside the Psalms, the prayers, the songs he was singing as he lived them. Oh, fantastic stuff. Cannot wait to get into more of that next fortnight. Now, please don't forget this amazing C.S. Lewis collection can be all yours. Just head over to thrivetoday.tv. This is a very special offer just for you, just for Christmas. A great stocking filler, if I do say so myself. We'll see you next fortnight here on Thrive Deeper.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thrive Deeper. Matthew and DJ really appreciate the questions and thoughts about what you're reading in the Bible as you go through it with Thrive. Our home on the internet is thrivetoday.tv. You can contact us, ask questions, see all of our resources and much more at our website, thrivetoday.tv. The Thrive Today network is on Facebook. Our Facebook page and links to our community groups are waiting for you. Just search and like Thrive Today page in Facebook now. Visit ratethispodcast.com/Thrive Deeper. If you appreciate what we do and want to help us reach more people, go to ratethispodcast.com/Thrive Deeper. Until next time, our prayer is that these shows will inspire you to go deeper into God's Word and thrive. This was another DJP.FM production.